Okay, so I'm Mike Avery with Virginia Saltwater Sport Fishing Association. We're a new association. We're still trying to feel our way through how we want to represent you, the saltwater angler, and what our activities are. We're still small and we're growing. So, uh, please, if you have time, consider joining VISA. The more numbers we have, the better off we are. Uh, there's one event happening literally starting this week in Richmond with our General Assembly. If you haven't gotten involved yet, there's lots of message traffic on it from the fishing clubs to the Chesapeake Bay Foundation to Visa, and that's some House bills on Menhaden that are being proposed. It's House Bill 150 and House Bill 151. You can go to the Virginia General Assembly page and see those. We're asking everyone hit up your representative as well as those that are on the subcommittees considering this bill. If they pass, that'll put the management of Menhaden under the VMRC, and that's House Bill 150. And 151 actually keeps them a mile off of our shoreline, so they can't do things on our shoreline real close. So please get involved this week. They're in Richmond this week, and they'll be there for several more weeks. So please, if you can, try to influence your legislator and get those moving. So we're here tonight with myself and Captain Stan Gold. I've known Stan for a number of years now and seen him out deep dropping, and we started talking and communicating with each other and helping each other on deep dropping. Stan runs blind date charters. And we're going to both talk kind of a tag team about our experiences on deep dropping. We've both been deep dropping for a number of years. I'll give Stan just a quick minute to introduce himself, to say a few words.
Hi, as Mike mentioned, Stan Gold, Blind Date Charters. I've been down in the Virginia area for about 20 years. My full-time job is I work with the Coast Guard. My part-time job is I run this charter business, and I've been fishing my whole life. Up in New England before I came down here. So one of the things that I really enjoy doing is the deep dropping. I started off wreck fishing on some of the near shore wrecks, got a better boat, went a little farther out, and found that I really like doing the deep drop fishing, and then I like taking charters out to do the deep drop fishing. So it's a great fishery that we have here, and with some good work with management, we'll keep it a great fishery.
Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about general information about deep dropping, and then we're going to talk about some specific information about the fisheries. One of the reasons I love deep dropping is you can fish for these kind of fish all year round. You don't have to, it's not just a summery fishery. You can fish with them in the wintertime. These fish really don't migrate. They may move around some out there, but when they find a piece of bottom they like out there, for the exception of the sea bass, they move in and out more rapidly. But the other fish, they find a place and they hang out. Your only issue in the wintertime is the dog sharks, and you got to fish around the dog sharks. And the dog sharks are probably showing up about now. They're probably late in coming because of our warm winter we've had so far, but they're going to show up. But my experience has been you can still catch plenty of meat fish around the dog sharks. You'll find a pocket of dog sharks, then you find a pocket of meat fish. Then you find a pocket of dog sharks, then you find a pocket of meat fish. So you just have to do shorter, smaller drifts. Just try to stay on the meat fish. You're still going to catch some dogfish, but when there's nothing else biting in the wintertime, it's still a great fishery.
And there's nothing wrong with eating the dogfish. I know a lot of people, we consider them a trash fish, but the spiny dogfish and the smooth dogfish, it's some good eating if you've never tried it. And some of you are out there laughing at me, but try it before you laugh.
So deep dropping for me so far has primarily been during the day. You can do it at night in low light, but you have to put the bait right on top of their heads, and then they'll bite. But so they're not going to see your bait very far away at night, so they're not going to be chasing very many baits. So your best success is going to be during the daylight, and even when the sun's up, pretty good. I like a light south wind as opposed to a north wind, because the prevailing current out there, unless you get into some sort of Gulf Stream eddy, that's influencing the currents, but the prevailing current is the Labrador current, which runs north to south, and it runs about a knot. Can be less depending on the moon phase. So if you have a light south wind going up against your Labrador current, that slows your drift down pretty good. I like about anywhere between a half a knot and a knot. Once you start going over a knot, you can still catch fish, but you just need a lot more lead to keep it down. Any other comments?
Yeah, no, and exactly. I mean, fishing with 3 pounds, 4 pounds, 5 pounds of lead is not fun, but it can be done. Um, Trying to find that balance of wind and current is the key. If you're out there and you're in a spot and there's too much current, sometimes just moving a quarter of a mile, you'll be in a completely different current. You can't really go by the phase of the moon. I've been out there on full moon and new moon, which the current's supposed to be ripping more, and you find out that some of those are the lightest current days. Um, it's a combination of, like Mike said, the Labrador current, the Gulf Stream. Those things are not affected by the sun and the moon, and then your tidal currents, which are affected by the phase of the moon. But it's hit or miss. I can never, ever, ever predict exactly what the wind and the current's going to be doing out there.
Yeah, although I have found sometimes the full moon can make the current rip. But you're right. I've been out there in a full moon, and all of a sudden we got a nice slow drift. So don't just let the moon phase affect your. If you have a nice weather window, go fishing.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying is don't not go because it's a full moon. If that's when you can go, go.
So we'll talk briefly about some of the tackle we use, and my experience deep dropping is you can pretty much use any rod and reel out there when you're deep dropping. You just have to have the line capacity to reach the bottom. You're fishing anywhere from 300 feet to maybe 900 feet to even 1,000. If your reel has enough line capacity, then you can deep drop. Obviously, braid is the best. I usually use anywhere from 65-pound braid to 80-pound. I usually don't go up to 100-pound braid. I think that's overkill. My favorite deep drop reel for hand cranking is still a Torium, which is actually in for service right now. So I actually have with me a Torsa. It has a relatively fast retrieve ratio. And I personally like an action with a rod that's relatively stiff on the tip. You still want to have it bend when a fish hits, but you want to be able to set that hook when you need it to. I know guys that fish with very light, flexible poles, and those work too. It's all a personal preference. But if you have to go to 32 to 40 ounces of lead, and just the lead bends your pole like a pretzel, then with a fish on, it's really gonna do a number on it. I like to put a shock leader on all of my braid. I don't like to attach the braid directly to your swivel. So here, and I was talking to Stan earlier, he kind of does the same thing. He attaches the braid. You really can't see this too well. This is called an FG knot. Some people call it a Sebile knot. But if you Google the FG knot, it's a perfect knot for attaching your braid to your leader. So I've got a relatively short leader here, probably only like 5 feet. But this actually will give you something extra to hang on to when you're hoisting the fish overboard. And two, if you happen to be in the rocks and your line starts getting against those rocks, then that braid, if you're doing it with braid up against the rocks, that braid is going to cut very easily. So having an extra leader on there is going to help you catch that fish and not have it break off. Any other comments on the tackle you use?
Yeah, I use about the same tackle. I like the Toriums, but I swap out those D'Artanium drags that are in the Toriums with a smooth drag or something else, a Carbon-Tex drag washer. And when you put that leader together, the leader's really, for me, it's doing two things. It's giving you that protection from the chafing, and it also you're forming a place where there are places in the canyons and some of the other places, especially if you're going to get grouper fishing, we'll talk about that in a little bit, where you're going to get hung up in the bottom. So if you get hung up in the bottom and you're stuck, I mean, really, really stuck, you're going to have to break the line. Braid's expensive. You want to make sure that that line breaks as close to the bottom as you can. So hopefully it's that shock leader that's going to break. So you want a good knot, but you don't want the best knot. Hopefully that'll be the place it breaks. But your knots and your leader has to be strong enough to get that 50, 60-pound grouper, or that 50 or 60-pound tile fish. So it's a balancing act. But the worst thing you can do is be in 600, 700, 800 feet of water, which means you have 1,000 or 1,200 feet of line out because the line's not going straight down, and you pull back and you got to break it off, and your line breaks at your reel. That's a lot of money, and if you don't have more line on the boat or more rods on the boat, you're done. At least that rod is done fishing for the day.
Okay, so the other thing about deep dropping is you can use, and a lot of people will use, electric reels. I have a pair of electric reels that I like to use for prospecting. There's nothing worse than dropping down, especially if you're in the deep water, 600 feet, and I won't kid you, there's a lot of areas out there that don't hold fish, and so you're going to do a lot of frustrating dropping. And so an electric reel at least lets you, when the captain says, "Okay, bring him up, guys, let's go to try a new spot," you're not cranking up by hand a 32-ounce sinker. So an electric reel is good for prospecting. A lot of times when we do find the fish, then everybody likes to switch to the manuals, but that's it. Everybody's personal preference. Just so you know, if you use an electric reel, you can neither claim a citation with the state, nor a state record, nor a world record.
And there's a lot of record fish out there to be caught. We're breaking records, several times a year. There's either a line class IGFA record or a world record being caught between the different species that you'll find out there. So if that's of interest, then make sure your rigs are IGFA compliant and make sure you're not using an electric reel.
Yeah, I actually did catch the world record snowy grouper, and it would have been the world record even today. It was 73.5 pounds, but I used my electric reel, so it couldn't count.
But it tasted just as good.
It ate very good, but it was still a hell of a fight, even on electric reels. Okay, so let's start talking about the fish, and we're going to kind of start with the easier fish first, and then work our way out towards the deep fish. And so we're going to kind of alternate who goes first, and I'm going to let Captain Stan go first. We're going to talk about blue line first. So go ahead.
Blue line tile fishing is one of the first of the deeper species that I started going after because it's in the shallow part of what we call the deep drop fishery. Almost every blue line I've caught or seen caught is caught somewhere between 280 and 320 feet of water. That's not to say they're not in deeper water. The guys that fish down in North Carolina catch them on a lot shallower water. But for some reason, in the area around the Norfolk Canyon, and by that I mean anywhere 20 miles north to 25 miles south of the canyon, you're pretty much at the 50 fathom mark. You're looking for some sort of a structure on the bottom. I've caught them on the flats, but there's generally something about the bottom that's a little different from the surrounding area. And I can't put my finger on it because sometimes it doesn't really look that different on the sounder. Sometimes you can see the fish on the sounder, sometimes you can't. But we found 7 or 8 or 10 areas that we know hold fish, and I'm sure there are many others out there that do too. They may not hold fish on any given day, but if you go back time and time again, you're going to find days where you're tearing them up, and you're going to find days where you're not. Most of this fishing, in terms of technique, is croaker fishing on steroids. I mean, it's just basic bottom fishing with whatever kind of bait you like to use. Like a strip bait, use a strip bait. That can be bonita, it can be bluefish, it can be flounder belly. I usually like a smellier bait than a flounder belly, but and plain old box squid works just fine most of the time. The big white squids that we cut into strips for flounder and make look real pretty, they look pretty going through the water, but I haven't had a lot of luck catching a lot of fish with them. 'Cause these guys are mostly scavengers. They're not the sight feeders that a flounder is. But just use a basic, if you can see this, just a basic bottom rig. I like to use circle hooks. Um, as long as I can convince my customers and folks that are fishing with me not to try and do the Woo Dave's hook set like they're fishing for largemouth bass. But I find, especially from fish coming down from the deep, once they're hooked, they stay on the hook with a circle hook. I generally don't use more than a hook rig because, again, you never know when the next world record is coming. When I have used 3 and 4 and 5 hooks, meat fishing for blue lines, it's generally only the bottom couple of hooks that catch fish. So I really haven't found that it's a great advantage to use more than 2 hooks on a bottom rig. Plain or fancy, to me, it doesn't seem to matter. When I first started, I liked a lot of bling. You can use a squid over your hook, just about any color. I played around with colors. I played around with glow beads, and I played around with plain hooks. And bottom line is, do what you like. It all works. Most of the time, if the fish are there, any of those baits are going to catch them. But I have had a couple of days where we've had 3 or 4 different baits, and it seemed to be that one particular thing worked better than anything else. Some days it was squid, some days it was just the squid heads. Some days, there was one day went out, I had a bunch of king mackerel that I had in the freezer that was no longer fit for eating, so I used it as strip baits, and we caught a lot of fish on the stripped out king mackerel, but we didn't catch a fish on any other bait that day. That's my blue line story for the most part.
Yeah, blue lines, like Stan said, there's nothing complicated about it. It's croaker fishing at 300 feet. And I have found if you're in an area that is just holding blue lines, you probably aren't going to mark them on your fish finder. Because the blue lines, fish that stay on the actual very bottom and never come off the bottom at all, your fish finder can't tell the fish from a rock on the bottom, and it's just not going to mark it. But if you're in an area where the blue lines and, for example, the sea bass are mixed together, as they a lot of times they are this time of year, the sea bass will often not be on the very bottom. They're kind of up and just swimming around. If you've ever seen a video of a wreck with sea bass on it, they're just all over the place, swimming around, looking for something to eat. There, you can mark, and oftentimes when you're in 300 feet, it's not going to be just sea bass. There's going to be blue lines mixed in with them. You can find oftentimes these hard bottoms versus just sand by zooming in on your fish finder, and you're going to see more of a jagged edge to your fish finder, and that'll represent a hard bottom. And these blue lines are down there feeding on very small crabs, about that big. If you ever, when you catch blue lines, that's what they'll spit up all over your deck, is these small crabs. So those small crabs are in rocks, not big giant boulders, but more like garden stones or gravel. The crabs are just kind of hang out in there, and the fish just kind of feed on those all day.
Yeah, these jagged edges that Mike's talking about, from my experience, are like 6 inches to a foot to 2 feet. You're not talking about a 3 to 5 to 10 foot profile. It's just a little bit.
Now, circle hooks work, and I've caught plenty on circle hooks, but my personal preference is a nice small J hook. I like to think the perfect hook for a blue line is a Gamakatsu Octopus 6/0 with a slight offset on it. Very sharp hook on it, and as soon as you feel a bite, you just wail on it. Give it a good, you can go rolling Martin on them because they have very hard mouths, very small mouths, and you can set it as hard as you like. And once you got the hook set, keep it tight. Some people get greedy and will hook one fish and then drop it back down to catch that second fish on a second hook. And that works, but sometimes you might lose that first fish too.
Not with a circle hook.
Not with a circle hook.
And
it's just a very short, simple rig. 4 loops, small one at the top for your swivel, a big loop at the bottom for your sinker, and just 2 loops for your hooks. And you can put, it's not even necessary, but I just put a little piece of glow tubing right there at the hook, not necessarily to give it more bling, but it also gives you a little bit of shake protection right there where the hook attaches to it, so that when they're biting and struggling, their mouth is right there on the tubing.
Well, you get that rig out. We were talking before about records. This is a perfectly good little rig, but if you're interested in an IGFA record, this rig would probably be disqualified for the hooks being too close together. So if that's of interest to you, make sure you pull out the IGFA rules and make sure your rig is going to qualify.
Yeah, I don't really think about that too much when I'm tying, but
I don't
that's
either.
a good point.
I don't either, but if if that's what you're going for, and you get out there and you get that fish and you go to register it and they say, oh, doesn't qualify, you're going to be disappointed.
You can also use for the blue lines. You can also catch them on a jig, and I like to just tip the hook with a little bit of meat on the jig. And I'm not talking about a fast jig like you're jigging for tuna, just kind of a lift and drop, just to give that jig some action. Just lift and drop, hold the bottom, lift and drop, and the blue lines and the sea bass will whack it.
And the bluefish and the tinker mackerel and the dogfish and just about everything else that's there. But if you're in there and you get to the dogfish, keep fishing. Because we've had days, like Mike said earlier, dogfish, 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 sea bass, sea bass, sea bass, bluefish, blue line, blue line, blue line, blue line. And when you get those 4, 5, 6 blue lines in a row, when you make your next drift, goes without saying, don't go all the way back up to where the dogfish were, but very often they're separated. So don't give up. I mean, that's a long way to run to get frustrated after 30 or 40 minutes because all you're catching are dogfish.
Just some general information about blue lines. The current regs for blue line in Virginia is 7 per person, and our tilefish regulations are written such that it's 7 tilefish per person, and it could be a blue line or a golden tile, but it's 7 in aggregate. So you can have 3 blue lines and 4 goldens, or 5 blue lines and 2 goldens, and any combination thereof. But only 7 tilefish per boat. And right now we have to have, whether you're a recreational fisherman or a charter, you have to have a special permit from the VMRC to go deep dropping and catch tilefish and keep tilefish.
It's a free permit.
Permit is free, and now you can even get it online on the VMRC page and just print it off from the page itself. Last year and the years past, you had to go to one of the licensing agencies and get it, and they had to print it for you. But now you can do it online and for free. Just don't forget about it. And with that, when you get the permit, also comes with mandatory reporting. So don't forget, as you catch these fish, within, I think, 7 days or 2 weeks time frame, you got to report your catch. And you can do that all online too, so it's not really terribly difficult. Now, don't forget, if you fish below the Virginia-North Carolina line and you're fishing out of Oregon Inlet, or you left out of Rudy, for example, and you sailed way south below the line, you're in a totally different, you're in the South Atlantic Council's jurisdiction, and the regs are different. So just keep that in mind. You're not in Virginia anymore. I used to think that if I left from Rudy, came back from Rudy, and I was fishing way down south somewhere, that the Virginia regs apply. But I was told by one of the Fed guys, he said, no, it's the North Carolina Virginia line, and you have to just extend it out. I said, well, but I'm not in state waters anymore. I'm in federal waters. Yeah, but that's still the line. You can't apply Virginia regs once you get below the state line. Just drawing the line straight east from the state line. Right. So just keep that in mind.
Yeah, because they are federally regulated. Those are federal regulations out there, not the state regulations. And yet, because we all have to comply with both the state and the federal regulations. So if you're coming out of a North Carolina port and fishing in Virginia waters, or waters off of Virginia, federal waters off of Virginia, and Virginia has a big season, a 7-fish season, but North Carolina has a smaller season, which I think they do now for tilefish. I don't know because I don't fish down there. you have to comply with the stricter of the rules, where you leave from or where you're fishing. Same with us. If we go down to North Carolina and the limit, if sea bass is closed down there but open up here, for example, or blue lines are closed down there but open up here, if we're in those waters, those southern waters, we have to comply with those rules.
Now, the other thing about these kind of fish is, first, there's not a release citation for these. It's only a weight citation. 10 pounds for a blue line is the weight citation. And you can catch a lot of 10-pound plus blue lines out there. But what I don't like to do, and it's just my personal preference, is I don't like to cull the fish, because you're going to catch some small ones and some big ones. If you throw back these fish, they may or may not survive the trip back down, whether you vent them or not. I don't know. So I just like, even if I catch a small tile, we normally box it up and it goes against our limit. But just keep that in mind. Try to fish ethically as much as possible. I try to avoid culling the fish and either throwing the small ones back, because you see them, they float off, they stay on the surface until they're out of sight. So whether they go down or not, who knows? Anything else on blue lines?
No, that's about it for the blue lines. Just go looking for those areas, and when you mark fish, when you find fish, record it, and you know to go back there. And if you see a spot that looks fishy, when you're out, if you're out there tuna fishing or doing something else, and you see something in that general water depth area and the bottom looks good, when you're done fishing, go drop on it for a half an hour and see what happens. And if it looked really fishy but you didn't get any fish, go drop on it some other time. Because, like I said, we got spots out there that catch fish, and you go back there either an hour or a day or a month later, and there's nothing. And you go back under very similar weather conditions and current and everything else seems to be exactly the same, but there's no fish there one day, but there's fish there another day. They'll be back there at some time. You just don't know when. Yeah,
the thing about bottom fishing is, what I like to do is, even if I'm out there tuna fishing or mahi bailing or whatever, as the guys are packing up the tuna gear and getting ready to go home, wherever you happen to be, as long as you're not in 3,000 feet of water, just drop, see what's down there while the guys, and because if you catch fish, odds are that's a good number, and it's your number and a new number, so you can mark the waypoint. Always try to do at least one or two blind drops, new drops per trip out there, and that's the way you can collect your own numbers. Is just doing blind drops. All right, so we're not so much going to talk about black sea bass. Sea bass are out there; they're just as easy to catch as your blue line. Our only issue right now is the season is closed for black sea bass, and so if you're out there deep dropping, it closed on 31 December, and if you catch one, you have to let it go. Even if 300 feet, 400 feet, 500 feet of water, you have to release it and let it go back in there, because it's just not open. We've been working to try, and the fishery guys are telling us that the sea bass population has rebounded. They're pretty healthy now. And so we're like, okay, well, why can't you give us a winter access? Why can't we fish for sea bass in January or February? And right now they're keeping it closed, I guess, for whatever reason they have. I can't figure it out. So let's go on to golden tile. I'll start first with golden tile. That's one of my favorite fisheries, is to fish for golden tile. So take your little dink rig with your 80-pound mono, and just don't fish with this for golden tile. Just set it aside. You can fish with the same reel, whether it's hand cranked or electric. But what you're looking for the golden tile is a soft, muddy, clay-like bottom. And those are all over the place out there. Don't just think the canyon. Even for the blue lines, don't just think the canyon. The golden tiles are all over the canyon walls, true, but they're also up and down the continental shelf. Anywhere from 500 to 700 feet of water. You just got to find those ledges that hold mud, so when you drop and you drop it down and your sinker goes in, and it feels like it's just stuck for a second, it comes up like that. That's the type of bottom you're looking for.
Yeah, if you've ever gone clamming in New England, for you Yankees like me, or if you've ever gone for fiddler crabs, when your boot gets stuck in the mud and you kind of have to suck it out. Um, when your sinker does that, you're in golden tilefish bottom. And
Yeah.
yes, you can feel it with braided line in 1,000 feet of water. You can feel that just as easily as if it was 5 feet down.
Yep. Now the golden tile, the reason they like the mud is they actually dig burrows, and they actually will go inside those burrows for safety and for resting, and they go in head first. Uh, and so I am convinced that while they're in their burrows head first, they're not feeding because they can't see anything. So there's times you could be in the right place, uh, and there's plenty of golden tile there, but for whatever reason, they've all decided to go in their holes. Maybe there's some predators around. Maybe there's some sharks swam by and they all went into like a gopher hole. They all ducked in their hole. Well, they're not biting. So just, if they're not biting, just go find a different area and come back to that spot later and they may be biting. I found that just the golden tile just turns on and turns off. And I haven't figured out whether it's current, light, time of day, time of year. I haven't figured any of that out yet. I think that they got their head in the mud, and they're just not eating at that particular moment in time. Just come back and try again. A lot of times those lobster boobies out there, you'll see them all over the canyon walls. Those are good places to try around those because those are often in places that hold bait because they're catching lobster. So if you find the lobster buoys, work your way around those anywhere from 500 to 700 feet. That's a good place to start. Slow drifts, obviously, anywhere from a half knot to a knot, just like blue lines. If you're on the canyon wall, you're either going to be drifting down the wall or up the wall. It's just usually the way it works out. I personally like to go up the wall because that way if you're going down the wall, your anglers always happen to let out line at a pretty fast rate because you're not only are you drifting, but your line's going down the wall pretty fast. Yeah, but it's something you can't control. The current wind are going to dictate that.
Yeah, it is a canyon. The profile of those walls is steep. I mean, it's only a couple of 100 yards with a difference in depth of several 100 feet. So
now the rig I like to use, and I'll say I use this type of rig for all of my deep water fishing, whether it's grouper fishing or golden tile fishing. I like anywhere from 150 to 200 pound mono, and I crimp everything. I like to use 3-ways, but you can also use those other type of leaders that some people use. I think Stan uses it here, where the leaders stick out a little bit differently. I like to use a 3-way. In this particular rig, there's nothing fancy about this particular rig. You can put anything on there that adds a little bling. Beads, glow tubes, squid heads. Don't try to think about, okay, you got to replicate exactly what's here. Do anything you want to add some bling to it. But what I like to do is have a long leader. It's still a 2-hook rig. I have a long leader on the bottom, relatively long. It's only like 1.5 feet. And a short leader on top. My thinking is as I'm drifting, you're going to be at an angle like this. You're going to have, there you go. You're going to have your sinker on the bottom, and you're going to have your top rig, your top bait suspended in the water column, and your bottom bait is going to drag on the bottom. So I've got one bait kind of dangling in the air, and one bait dragging along at the bottom, a little bit away from the top bait. So if they miss the top bait as it comes by, they have a shot at the bottom bait. And so that's kind of my rig. I like to put on this. My favorite for Goldens now is for the hook is an Eagle Claw Sea Circle hook, anywhere from 10-aught to 13-aught. It's a nice sturdy hook, very sharp. It'll set the hook really nice, and I like a relatively long piece of meat. Fresh is always better. Squid works, frozen squid works, but if you can find false albacore, find you a bluefish, find you any kind of fresh bloody meat, that's always the best. And making nice long strip meats and just hook it on there, double hook it on there. And when you feel the bite, you'll feel the bite. But now you're fishing with a circle hook. Don't just wail on it. I like to, when I feel the bite, I like to open the bail and feed it to him for a good count of three, 1,000, 2,000, 3,000, and then close the bail and then just start reeling. Don't, once he's tight, you may give it a couple of good little, bring that hook all the way through the roof of his mouth. Give it a couple tugs, but don't just immediately wail on it, and you'll have more success catching these golden tiles with that technique.
Yeah. In general, though, you'll find, and there's nothing wrong with setting a hook like that, but the Goldens, when they hit, it's generally, you can feel the head shake, and they're pretty much setting the hook themselves with a circle hook. I do similar things with the rigs, and I've got some that look very similar to what Mike's using, but I've caught just as many fish on a plain old, extra large size 2-hook bottom rig with no bling. I do like at least at a minimum, I'll put some glow beads on it or some glow tubing or squids that glow. You can use these drop lights. There's all different kinds of drop lights you can use. And one thing that I've seen, but I haven't personally had success with, I know that other people have, the tilefish, the Goldens are right in the bottom. So one school of thought is if you need 2 pounds of weight, if you need 32 pounds of weight, some people will put two 16-ounce sinkers, one at the top of the rig, one at the bottom, so that both hooks are always on the bottom all the time. Me personally, I've tried it. I haven't found it makes a difference, but if nothing else is working, give it a try.
I do like when we're fishing for golden tile because you're talking pretty deep water, and it is very dark down there, even in the light of day. I do like, and these little water activated lights work too. I've also used the same disco light that I've used for swordfish, and put that on there. This thing does a little disco dance on you, but these things are about 20 bucks a pop, so they're a little pricey. But these are what I use for while I'm sword fishing too. But I've also put them on when I'm deep dropping for goldens or grouper. Don't know if it makes a big difference because I've caught plenty without lights, but I've caught plenty with lights, and so it is dark down there, and this does give it, having a light does give you a little bit of extra visibility.
Yeah.
The Goldens are still mixed in with the blue lines, 7 per person. This last year in 2015, there is a citation program for Goldens now. It has to be 30 pounds or better for a golden tile, and you have to hand crank it. You can't use your electric reel. And don't try to claim a citation with the electric reel. That's kind of like cheating at solitaire. Yeah, they'll send you a piece of paper, but did you really earn it? No. And I will tell you, a 30-pound to 40-pound golden tile from 600 feet, hand cranked, ain't no joke. It is definitely, you earn that citation if you land that fish. It's a nice fish, and they fight like the dickens.
So you haven't mentioned my favorite strip bait though for golden tiles.
No, go ahead. I've heard you say this before.
Dolphin belly. If you're out there and you bail a dolphin, the nice tough meat in the dolphin belly is one of my favorite fresh baits to use it if I can.
I've heard others say they'll use a bluefish carcass. Once you've stripped all the meat off of a bluefish, put the carcass on there too.
Well, these are big fish. So any fish that's about, a pound or two, or maybe a little less than that, I've tried whole dead spot. I've tried whole dead croaker. I've tried chunks of eel. I've caught them on bunker, but bunker is very, very soft. And if you're dropping down 2 pounds of weight, 6, 7, 800 feet, you don't want to be wondering if your bait's still there. So I love a hardhead croaker. You put a hook like this through the jaw of a hardhead croaker, maybe 6, 7 to 10 inches long. These are big fish. We've gotten them up to 48 pounds or 52 pounds as of this year in my boat. you're not going to catch as many, but the ones you catch are all going to be 30-pound plus. Um,
Okay, so we're gonna move on to grouper now. And I apologize, it's already 8 o'clock. We got started late due to my technical difficulties. So please bear with us. We're gonna wrap it up here pretty soon. Then we're gonna do some quick questions for anybody that has questions. But grouper, man, probably the best eating fish out there is our grouper class we have out there. The snowy grouper, the yellow edge grouper, even the wreck fish, which is technically not a grouper, but they eat just like the grouper. Uh, I use the same rigs and the same baits for grouper, but let Stan talk about grouper first.
yeah, and I do the same thing. My grouper rigs are no different than my golden tile rigs. Um, you'll talk to some people and they use a completely different rig. I haven't found it that it matters. Fishing for grouper, and for that matter, you can lump the barrelfish and the wreck fish in that same exact category because they are in about the same place. They may not be in the same place at the same time, but they all hang out in the same general area. Use the same exact rig I'm using for the tile fish. The only exception is because the grouper are in craggy, rocky, corally areas. I wouldn't use a rig like Mike's. This is just me. I'm sure he does. I don't like that extra long leader on the bottom because I think your chances of hanging up are greater. It's like using a big old flounder rig on the wrecks. Always shorten up the hooks when I'm fishing for flounder on the wrecks than when I'm over sandy bottom because of the fear of getting hooked up to the coral. Same thing with the grouper fishing versus the tile fishing. Same exact baits, same exact rigs. You're just in a rocky, craggy bottom instead of that soft mud that Mike talked about before. The size of the groupers that we catch, I've caught them as small as about 12 pounds. I don't think I've got anything smaller than 10 or 12 pounds. A couple of wreck fish smaller than that, 8, 10 pounds. But the vast majority of the grouper that we've caught have been, 20 plus up to, I think 54 pounds was the biggest grouper that I put in the boat, a 54-pound snowy. And on those 16-aught or 14-aught or 10-aught, every circle hooks don't have the same size standards that J hooks do. So one company's 10-aughts, another company's 16-aught. But I've caught everything from a 3/4 pound blackbelly rosefish to red hake to tinker mackerel to 55-pound snowies on these same rigs. Current matters a little bit more with the grouper, again, because you're fishing in a more craggy, scraggly, nasty, gnarly bottom.
Yeah, definitely. If you find big rocks, I'm talking big giant rocks, you're in a possible grouper area, and you'll find, at least on the canyon, you'll find that more in the north wall than the south wall. You'll also find it, like I said, up and down the continental shelf. If you can find an area on the continental shelf, if you study your charts, find an area where the deep water comes into the shallower water, comes into 50 fathoms in a relatively tight area. That's a good place to prospect for grouper, because that formation where you get the deep water next to the shallow water often produces a rocky bottom that will hold grouper. Unfortunately, our grouper fishing, and I think it's, I blame some of the commercial fishermen from up north over the past decade. They would come into our waters and just long line the bottom. We used to have a really good grouper fishery. They're still out there, but it's getting harder and harder to catch groupers now. But when you do latch into one, it's a good fight and the top shelf table fare. If you've been fishing around in the bay this year, while flounder fishing or bottom fishing, you probably caught a lot of baby gag groupers. That's something kind of relatively new. I would like to see, that we inshore in the bay and near shore, that we can develop a nice gag grouper fishery. That'd be pretty awesome, I think. But right now, all we can do is keep one per person, and you still got to have that permit, as we talked about. But grouper is just one per person. So if you catch a 12-inch grouper, and you have the permit in the bay, yeah, you can keep it, but you're not even gonna get a sandwich out
Yeah,
of it.
not a lot of meat there.
I'm hoping they come back. No citation program for the groupers, although you can still get a state or world record for grouper, but no citation program. There's simply just not enough of them being caught out there on a consistent basis to warrant a citation program. So let's move on to some of the other fish real quick. I'm gonna let Stan quickly talk about one of his favorite fish is the barrel fish. You want to talk about barrel fish real quick?
Yeah, barrel fish to me started. I mean, the first one we caught, we had no idea what it was. It was about 7, 8 years ago, maybe, and I had to take it to 3 or 4 different places. The folks at Long Bait Tackle thought they knew what it was, but I actually packaged it up and put it in the freezer whole because I didn't know what it was. And I talked to some folks at Vim's, and oh, that's a barrel fish. And not a lot of people knew about them. And it kind of looked slimy, and especially when it died, it was as bad as a cobia, just in terms of the slime it put off. It's like, this thing any good to eat? And the guys at Vim said, oh, it's excellent table fare. So okay, so we catch 1 or 2 mixed in with wreck fish and grouper and tilefish, and we didn't find that they liked a particular type of bottom. And we didn't catch them regularly either. So we caught them on soft bottom while we were catching goldens. We caught them in scraggy bottom when we were catching wreckfish and grouper. Usually 20, 30, 40, 50 yards away from the grouper, but in the same general area. And then finally one day about 4 or 5 years ago, we found a hole where 3 people would drop down with 2 hook bottom rigs, and we'd bring up within 30 seconds, everybody would be hooked up with a double of barrel fish. We kind of sort of self-limit ourselves to 2 or 3 per person. There is no limit on them. They'll run anywhere from about 8 or 9 pounds up to, I think the biggest one we caught was close to 30 pounds. It was about 27 pounds. It was caught on an electric reel. I think that's close to a world record, but that wouldn't have qualified because it was on electric, like I said. But boy, when I ate the first one, we filleted it out. The meat was beautiful white, similar to grouper, a little firmer, not quite as flaky. But oh, it was good. It was really, really good. And then I ran into some Korean folks who eat a lot of sashimi, and I tried my first barrelfish sashimi this year, and it was, for those of you that like sashimi, it was as good as just about anything you can find. So we've got a couple of holes that when they hold fish, it's nonstop. It is on fire. The hardest thing to do is to, like I said, self-limit yourself because we don't want to fish them out. And then they'll be there for 3-4 weeks, or in one case they were there about 2 months, and then they turned off. And we went back to catching an occasional fish here and there. And we keep looking around for them, and I'm sure in a month or 2 months or a year or 2 years, we'll find, another pot of them like that. They're out there. I haven't figured out, there's no particular season. It's not like they're there in the winter. They're not there in the summer. But when you find them, it's nonstop. They fight all the way to the top. The tilefish and the grouper, a lot of times they'll get up maybe about 60, 70 feet from the surface, and then they kind of give up. The pressure differential gets to them, and they end up floating up that last bit. The barrelfish fight all the way to the surface. So it's a good fight, and it's good eating.
The last fish, well, not the last fish. There's actually lots of fish out there you can catch. One of the other favorite fish out there is called the black belly rosefish. And they're in the same areas as the grouper and the barrels. They're also like the hard bottom, but often they're kind of at the tops of the ledges. The only problem with those, they're only about a half pound. They're not very big. Some of them get maybe a pound. And so you got to catch a lot of them. But in my opinion, they actually are better eating fish than the black sea bass. The meat is just more sweet and tender. So if you specifically want to target the black-bellied rosefish, load up on your hooks. Put on 6, 7, 8 hooks. Just a little piece of squid works. I've got dropped down with an 8-hook rig and brought up 8 rosefish because they just pile on when they're thick. It's just excellent eating.
Yeah, and they live in the very same water the Goldens live. So I've caught, half 1 pound. I've got up to probably 2.5 pounds are probably the biggest ones we've seen, but that's the exception, not the rule. But on a 2-hook golden tile bottom rig, I've had a black belly on one and a 30-pound golden on the other hook. So if I'm in the rosefish, at least one person on my boat is going to be fishing for goldens. And I'm not convinced, but I think maybe we've caught a rosy and had it eaten by a golden, but I can't prove it.
Okay, guys, let's try to wrap it up, and we're going to get to questions. So if you have questions, you can just type them in, and we'll get to them. Just to kind of summarize deep dropping, it's a good plan A, and it's a good plan B. You can go out there specifically for deep dropping. A lot of people don't necessarily do a dedicated day trip for deep dropping. A lot of times, if you can't find the tuna fish or the troll bite, it's a good backup plan to have in your kit bag. You just throw some cut bait and just tie some rigs up. And at least if you can't find the pelagics on the top by trolling, you can, if you have a couple good numbers built up, you can almost always come back with the box full of nice eating fish. Just keep track of the regulations and your permits, and the deep dropping can be just a lot of fun. So let's look at some of the questions we got over the panel. The first one is from Scott Gregg. Can you get the permits through the charters, or do you have to do it separately? If you're fishing with a charter, you are covered under the charter's permit. And then all of the permits you get online through the VMRC belongs to the boat. You don't have to, as an individual, get a deep drop permit. You may or may not still have to have a fishing license if the boat doesn't have a boat permit for the fishing license. But you're covered under the charter. It has you covered. You don't have to have one. And if you're fishing on somebody else's boat that has a boat permit, you don't have to have it. But if you're the boat owner and your own captain, just go get one. It's free. Even if you don't plan to, it's just free. Just have one, just in case you decide to do it. Next question I got was, what's the average size of the blue lines and the golden tilefish out there? You want to take that one?
Well, the blue lines can go anywhere from about 2 or 3 pounds up to 22, 23, 24 pounds. And my experience is they tend to be in similar size groupings. So if you're getting a lot of 2 and 3 pound fish, you're gonna keep getting a lot of 2 and 3 pound fish, and that's when I'll move and try and find some bigger ones. The goldens, I'd say that the average size is maybe 15 to 20 pounds. You see a few 4 or 5 pound fish, not many. And we've gotten them as big as I've got them as big as 52 pounds on a handheld scale on the boat. I don't know how accurate the scale was. The biggest one I weighed on a known good scale was 48 pounds, and the 52 pounder we got this year was every bit as big as that 48 pounder. But I'd say average is right around 20. Does that marry up with your experience, Mike?
Yeah, I mean, the size varies so greatly out there. Because, I mean, there are ones that are born every year, small ones. But you catch the monsters out there, too, and that's what makes it exciting. You can bring up a 20 to 22 pound blue line or a 50 pound a golden out there, and that's what makes you keep coming back for more.
Yeah, the 52 pounder we got this year was the first guy on the first drop on the first drift, and his bait hit the bottom, and I think he dropped it in the guy's mouth, in the fish's mouth. As soon as it hit the bottom, he was hooked up.
Another question from John. He says, "Do you like strip baits or butterfly for the grouper?" Uh, he says, "I know in Florida they like to butt fly a fish for them. Butterfly, butterfly. Do you butterfly any of your baits?"
Um, Sometimes I do. Um, if I've got some croaker or some other small fish, croaker spot size, I'll tend to butterfly it, and I do that. These are opportunistic feeders. You know, anybody who's been fishing me for flounder knows I'm real fussy about what a flounder bait looked like, so it flutters nicely through the water. These are opportunistic feeders. They don't really care about how it looks. I like to butterfly the fish for two reasons. And this is just me. I have no idea if there's any validity to it, but it seems to work. Butterflying it does two things. One, it puts more scent in the water. Um, and two, I think it helps stop the bait from spinning, and gives it a little more natural of a presentation down there.
Now, when I'm sword fishing, I do like to butterfly my strip baits for swordfish. Because when you're sword fishing, you're not fishing at night for sword fishing. You're not fishing on the bottom, and so you're drifting through the water column. So you want it to look like a swim bait. And so I don't think butterflying for deep dropping can hurt. Uh, okay, any other questions from the group? I don't see anything else. I think maybe I've got them all. Let me scroll back up to the top here. I do apologize for starting late. I figured out what was going on. You know, when you broadcast with the live event, you have to have YouTube, obviously, but you have to have an encoding software. And somehow, uh, the settings, when we changed over, I think, to this daylight savings time, the settings for the encoding software didn't change over. You know, everything else on the computer updates automatically. So it was an hour off between. So I had to figure that out and force it to transmit. And I apologize for starting late. That's just, you know, I'm only moderately technical savvy, and I'm still learning a lot of things.
The ITs I work with or that help me at work have a saying for that. They call it PIPCAC. Problem exists between keyboard and chair.
Yes, yes. It's usually operator error, and in this case, it was that I didn't figure out that the time zones were different. As I dug into it, I figured it was wasn't scheduled to start broadcasting till 8. Okay, guys, I think I got all the questions, and I think we've gone through most of our presentation. Did you have any closing remarks, Dan?
You know, the only thing we haven't talked about is weather, and it kind of goes without saying, but we're going 70 miles offshore, and a lot of us are doing it in fairly small boats. And the weather can get nasty quickly. I'd rather cancel a trip if the weather's iffy and wish I went than not cancel a trip and wish I hadn't. And I've been out there under both conditions. So if you're going to go out there, pay attention to the weather.
Oh, absolutely. I think if you fish offshore enough, you find yourself out there and the weather blows up on you. You say, "What the hell am I doing out here?" Because you got to get 70 miles home in that crap, and so you can never be too careful. Okay, guys, I think that's all we have. Again, this is brought to you by the Virginia Saltwater Sport Fishing Association. Take a moment, consider joining VSSA. It's only $25 a year to become a member. And you'll have access to all of our videos that we do, and we've got a series of them planned. We'll do once a month, and you'll have access to them all. Plus, you know, we are still trying to represent you, the saltwater angler, at the different fishery meetings, and so we're trying to keep our nose to the ground on what's going on, and try to get involved, try to bring issues to you as they come up. So now I see that we just stopped. So thanks a lot, guys.